Thank you very much, colleagues. As I said earlier, global city, we look abroad and home to see what others are doing. I think we've got a terrific collection of speakers now, some of them have already been teed up, and particularly Emma Frost on work they're doing. So we want to ask the question, what's working at home and abroad? Okay? And we have got 4 colleagues who are going to discuss this. Paul Grover has already been mentioned, dispatches, and thank you for the free contribution you're making today, Paul. Looking at a lot of international experience. I want to get that said. Des McNulty, very, very senior player in Scotland, University of Glasgow, was a minister in Scottish Government, huge experience on inclusive communities, we'll talk about that. Delighted to have Kristen Sorbye, very recently appointed as Chief Executive of Oslo Science City. She's new to the job and it's interesting to listen to her reflect on all the challenges they face. So I think one of the things that came out of that first session was this is difficult. It's hard stuff and it's complicated, and I think we shouldn't hide away from that. So it'll be interesting to hear what Christian has to say for that. But last but not least, and the first speaker, Emma Frost, very much involved in the London Olympic legacy, chair of UK Innovation District Group. I first met her at this little seminar we had in London some months ago. Delighted she could join us. So can I ask you to please welcome Emma Frost? Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. It's always a bit dangerous when you're teed up so nicely because you can only go downhill from there, but thank you very much. So as has been said, I was going to speak from 2 different perspectives this morning. One on my role as chairing the UK Innovations District Group, and one is my role as Head of Community and Business at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London. Because of time, I'm going to try my best to keep to 10 minutes. I'm actually just going to focus on the latter role and try and give some practical examples of how we've been approaching inclusive growth for the last 10 years on the ground. Hopefully it'll pick up on a lot of things that have already been discussed this morning. And before I dive into some examples, I just wanted to sort of reset our context, which will reference a lot of things that have been said before, but that repetition is quite important on the points that we're really dealing with, because as has been said, these are difficult. Forgive me if I read a little bit, but in order to get through everything I plan to say, it's probably best if I keep to what's on the page as much as possible. So at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, we have been working on this agenda almost inside out. We don't call ourselves an innovation district at the moment. We're rethinking what our shape and form needs to be looking forward. But actually, we've started with the communities. We've started with the base of the residents and the businesses, the enterprises there already. That was essential because, as you all know, we had the sort of mothership of the Olympic Games landing down in 2012, and that changes the entire nature of a place at a scale that most of us can't really imagine. So unless you start with what's already there and with what really matters and a core social purpose to drive that change, you just won't get the results that you want. So we have kind of approached this the other way round in that we're not labelled or haven't thought of ourselves as an innovation district, but we've been modelling, as I say, for about the last decade, different very practical examples of how you test and trial forms of inclusive innovation to bring about the sort of change that now, thankfully, innovation districts are all starting to talk about. And that's not to say we've got it all right, far from it. These are really complex, stubborn issues, or we wouldn't be having discussions like this and we wouldn't be suffering the issues that Henrietta outlined before. There is no one simple, easy model, and I think that's right with what Joe highlighted before, that we need a very place-based approach in response to the complexities that we face. But I think one thing we do have to agree on is that we all have a role to raise the floor as well as the ceiling. I know that sounds quite simple, but I work in simple terms. If you think about house extension, it's so much easier to do a loft extension than it is a basement conversion. And I keep that analogy in mind because essentially that's what we're trying to do. We have to raise the floor as well as the ceiling, and we haven't been doing that thus far. We all have this collective responsibility, as I say, and that's whether you're a developer, a social entrepreneur, an employment founder or a work founder, a youth worker, a finance director in a local authority. The scale of change and the new systems of thinking that we need to start unpicking to tackle these stubborn issues, it won't be delivered by one perfectly titled job role or one organisation or even one government administration, even if we had one that worked. This is collective change in mindsets, socioeconomic models and methods. And I think the focus area to start with is diversification in employment, education and skills, crucially with the focus on skills, not just formal education, and social networks. And the key word in all of that is diversification, which I'll come back to. So at the Olympic Park, I've said we don't claim to have all the answers. We haven't got it right all the time. And that in itself is one of our key lessons of success, treating inclusive growth as an iterative learning process. It's not a logical Prince 2 management style process, and it shouldn't try to be. Understanding what you're dealing with and having the risk appetite, the skills resource, and the flexibility to respond to that accordingly is essential. And this means building it in from the start, as has been said before already this morning, as part of your core purpose. Again, I return to my house analogy. It's much easier to build that basement in at the very beginning than it is to retrofit it 10 years down the line. And if you need an example of that, look at Canary Wharf, and really study what happened with the development of Canary Wharf. Not good enough. We don't want to repeat that again anywhere. So, just building on all of those, I think it would help if I turn to the right page. The other thing I was going to say is the interventions have to have direct response to your location, situation, and context. Now, I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it speaks to the point that's already been raised this morning about scale. How big can your area of impact really be as an innovation cluster if you want to deliver deep impact and change? I think we need to interrogate the notion of scale and not be afraid of focusing at this at a hyper-local level. It's a little bit what Henrietta was drawing on before. Neighbourhoods, understanding the scale of neighbourhoods and what people really connect and relate to. The human nature of place shaping is so fundamental. We have to think at that granular human scale. It's the place-based networks that we need to grow. It's the trust that we need to build. These are the things that will start to create the systems of positive change that we need. And as Joe hinted at before, and as is written thoroughly through the industrial strategy with the reference to place, it is there. It is starting to be spoken about more than before, but bluntly put, I'm not sure it goes far enough. For those that might not know the site that I'm talking about when I say the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, it's the area that hosted the Olympic Games in 2012, the Olympic and the Paralympic Games, sorry. It's a 560-acre site, 6.5 kilometres of waterways, 5 major permanent sporting and events venues, major transport hub, gets 6 million visitors a year on average, 4 universities, 5 schools, 3 nurseries, 2 major employment hubs generating 40,000 jobs and 24,000 new homes. So I rattle all that off just to say it's big. We get it. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of activity. It's really big, and it's had major physical investment on a kind of supercharged scale. The build programme has been immense over the last 10 years. But we have matched that every single step of the way with social and economic and, dare I say it, cultural investment as well. And that's really, really important because, as I said before, we cannot think of any one thing in isolation. To create the sort of urban change and the positive, sustainable futures that we need from our urban hotspots, we have to have the social, the physical, the economic all entwined and all understood. The park's framed by 4 boroughs, and the local population within these boroughs is over 1.5 million. It's the youngest and most diverse population of the whole of the UK. 35% of East London's population is under 25, and there are 104 first languages spoken in Newham alone, which is one of those 4 boroughs. So the big question for me is, how do we harness all of this activity and this investment and this change to benefit those people? And that's the question that I know you're asking yourselves here around Liverpool and in all the other areas that we represent. So I thought I'd just give a very quick overview of some of the examples of what we've been focusing on there. First one is around employment, as has already been said. Firstly, this is about creating a diverse workspace offer. It is an ecosystem that you need to build. And if you think of one of the most common ecosystems, a rainforest, I like to think of the leaf on the ground as the little coffee table with someone on a laptop, in the coffee shop. That matters just as much as the massive 30-metre tree, which is the equivalent of UNICEF headquarters that's just moved to the park. We have to cultivate that whole workspace ecosystem. And it has to include everything from the individual freelance workspace to the makerspace to the wet and dry labs, the innovation co-work and the headquarters. And we're doing that. We've got 5.2 million square foot of new workspace, as well as existing workspace and warehouses and workshops all around the area. It's about how we network all of them and understand that cumulative offer. We're not just looking at creating new jobs. Obviously, we're very lucky. We are generating new jobs. 14,000 people have already been employed directly on creating the park. It's different types of jobs, as was said earlier. By this, I mean whole new sectors. So we're looking at digital creative, data analytics, a real focus on fashion and the circular economy within fashion, and other circular economy spin-offs. Now, these are industries that either haven't existed before in this part of London or are being reinvented or re-remembered in the case of fashion. So it's really quite radical change in whole new sectors of business growth. We're also looking at new levels of roles, so degree-level apprenticeships and higher skilled jobs locally. Again, as was mentioned before, that's so important. We have to raise the ceiling as well as the floor, and we have to invest in different levels and skills for jobs. It's fair and good employment. We're a London living wage zone. We're phenomenally proud of that. That means every single venue within the Olympic Park and all the employment bases pay at least London living wage minimum. That's really important. That's a policy driver that has been a bedrock in everything we do. It's been way harder than it should have been, but it now means that we can stand up with pride and say we're a London living wage zone, we pay a fair way, and everyone who comes to work in our gang does the same. The same approach on 0 hours contracts, modern slavery, paid internships. We've already got 270 young people who benefited from park apprenticeships. We developed the first construction group training association apprenticeship model, which revolutionised the way that the construction industry can actually use apprenticeships, which, as many of you know, if you work in the construction industry, has been quite a challenge before. I can't go into detail on any of this, but if anyone would like to talk to me afterwards, I'm really happy to say more. Diversification of the workforce, that point about diversity that I mentioned before, this is really important. It's long-term, but it's really important. So we start with a demand-led approach. That means it's driven by employer needs. This can't be top-down. This can't be charitable. This can't be, oh, you really should do good CSR. That just won't cut it. It won't create the sort of structural change that we need to see. So instead, we start with live conversations with the businesses. What are your problems? What are your recruitment problems? Where are you at? What are your productivity problems? What do you think they're going to be in 15 years' time? You know, you have a very business-focused conversation, and then you work with that. And we're seeing real change. So we've developed new industry-led internship programs like Flipside, a 3-month creative product design, digital product design program. 80% of the participants in that, which is aimed at underemployed or long-term unemployed young people, 80% have gone on to find work within the sectors that they did their internships in. That's a really high rate of return, so it's working. The other thing I wanted to touch on, obviously, was education. Again, I've gone to the wrong. I really should plan my pages better. Sorry. No, before I get to education, I was going to talk about the power of procurement. It sounds quite boring, and sometimes it is, but procurement is a really big lever that we need to harness a lot better. We set targets for underrepresented groups with all of our procurement contracts, whether they're large or small scale. It's not just about local employment now, it's about really targeting underrepresented groups. But critically, we don't act like the target police. As I said before, it's about a very practical dialogue and a constructive support system that we have with the businesses. So we still adopt an employer-led approach. It all has to make good business sense. We say, let's help them train, recruit, and attract the skills they need from the diverse talent pool that's on their doorstep. That obviously links to education, because we need to invest heavily in the skills base to make sure that it is future-proof, that we are building the connections between industry and the education. And that starts at early years and works all the way through up to higher and further education. And we're doing that through quite a strategic model on what we call East Education. And that's linking 204 primary and secondary schools within our immediate vicinity and having a very coordinated programme of offers that's teacher-led. So we have a leadership model with the teachers telling us what their issues are in school and what they'd most like from industry. So again, we're not getting tokenistic CSR, come in and do this paint a wall session or something like that in a school. We're actually getting targeted support that leads to CPD for teachers, that helps them connect with what are the skills and the jobs of the future. How do we reignite more creativity back in the school system? Because for the last 8 years, it's literally been squeezed out of the curriculum. So what can we do to try and help reintroduce those creative mindsets? I'm talking about things like critical thinking, logic models, design practice. Lots and lots of teachers actually don't know where to start with teaching and encouraging these sort of behaviours and mindsets. So we need to help them by people who are practising it in their day job, whether they realise it or not. And we've now got systems and structures of putting that into schools, starting at primary, working all the way through secondary. Enterprise support is another quick one that I'll just touch on. I'm sorry, I'm aware, very short of time. But enterprise support is really important, going back to my earlier point about cultivating the ecosystem and making sure that you really speak to the whole gamut of activity that needs to be included in your area of change. So we partner with our universities. As Henrietta said before, we do an awful lot together with UCL and with Loughborough in London as well, who both deliver very good business accelerator programs. We help increase, or they do, they help increase the success rate of spin-out businesses from R&D. We help broaden access to those courses by offering bursaries, by offering very targeted recruitment and community outreach. We help diversify the range of people coming through those accelerator programs. Another good example is a program that we designed and delivered called Echo++, which is a free, low barrier to entry accelerator program designed specifically to help diversify the range of people who start businesses. We need to shape up the entrepreneurial market. Does anyone, the UK average for an entrepreneur, is 47, he's white, he's male, he's got 20 grand spare in his back pocket and he's degree educated. That doesn't speak to the East London profile that I know at all. So we really need to shape up the routes into business. Who gets to start a business? Who gets to innovate? And that accelerator program was entirely around how do we open up the inclusion of that space of innovation. We've had 102 entrepreneurs supported so far through it, 75% of them are female. The age range is 20 to 65. 60% have never accessed any type of business support before. and 37% came from Black, Asian or minority ethnic communities. So it is working. It really takes very focused, targeted effort and investment, but it is reaping the results that we want to see. I think the last point I was going to make before summing up is about the focus on not just youth outreach, but all outreach to diversify our networks. So community engagement, community building is my background. I recognise I'm biased, but I think it's a fundamental bedrock upon which we have to grow all of this activity. It is very much about engaging properly in an in-depth way with the communities that we serve. That means understanding them, connecting with them, starting by listening, practical joint projects, empowering, respecting, and then taking managed risks together. And I think a lot of those points are said but not really understood many of the time. So taking managed risks together is quite an important aspect of how you genuinely work properly hand in hand with communities in your area. This change is the sort that we're talking about to bring about the collective action. It can't be a for them, by us, or done to them. We've really got to move away from the them and us kind of coding that we use. But understanding proper community development will help lay a foundation for all of this that we need to see. So the main key messages to summarise: inclusive growth is essential, but it's not charitable. We have strong business and national government cost reasons for investing in this properly. It's not a moral argument, it's a productivity argument as well. Prosperity and productivity are different, but they're not mutually exclusive. And they're also not one-directional. And we really need to understand, what we mean about all those points. Diversity makes us smarter and stronger. It informs how we innovate, who gets to innovate, what we innovate, and the benefits that are secured from innovation and how these are shared. Ultimately, it helps us stay competitive in a global market. Diversity makes us smarter. Don't forget the power and importance of culture. It really helps breed that sort of ecosystem of activity. It helps attract and retain the talent that we mentioned before. It helps raise all sorts of profile and pride in an area, which counts for a hell of a lot. And we learned that through hosting the Olympic Games. So inclusive growth and a general inclusive economy has to be hardwired into your urban cluster or your regeneration model from the very start. As I said before, it's much harder to retrofit. Some of the economic growth is about winning hearts and minds, but it's not warm and fluffy, and it really shouldn't be thought of as such. It's how you deliver hardcore economic change, and you have to invest in this. There is a capital question that we need to get more honest about. It costs a lot of money to do this, but it returns even more value. So really there's no question that we should be doing it, it's just getting to the detail of how we do it. You need a partnership approach. It can't be a single-owned or top-down response to these problems. It's a coalition of responsibility. You have to take a long-term view. So at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, we know that our objectives won't be realised probably for another 50 years. It's going to outlive my organisation, my role, and probably me. But we have to be able to think and plan for the long term if you're going to see the change that we so desperately need. And finally, you have to have committed, generous, and progressive leadership. That's what you need to lead a place and to help bring about the changes that we so desperately want. Thanks.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. As I said earlier, we're delighted we've got Kristin Sorbye, who's come from Oslo, Chief Exec Oslo Science City. She worked with the Oslo City Council when they decided they needed a science city, and as a reward or a punishment, they gave her the job. It's just starting. I will say, obviously, Kristin is the only person there not speaking in her first language, but you're very, very welcome. Please, let's see what we have to say.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much for inviting me today. It's highly valuable that the innovation districts of Europe meet to share experiences and help each other when needed. It's especially interesting for me to visit Liverpool, because Liverpool and your many grand development plans are of great inspiration for the work we have just started in Oslo, so I have been there before. Given how new we are, as we started only this May, I think I should explain our inception. Because earlier this year, the city of Oslo adopted its very first official strategy for how to develop Oslo as a so-called knowledge city. A new approach in this strategy is to connect urban development with knowledge-based business development. An important part of this strategy is to establish innovation districts. The document was approved unanimously in the City Council and had been through an extensive process of dialogue with relevant groups, such as the business sector, knowledge institutions, civil society, students, and so on, in order to ensure inclusion, justification and stability, also in case of change of local government. I think it is somewhat unique for an innovation district to have such a strong starting point with the full participation support of the local government and other relevant groups of society. And I guess it's worth mentioning, like Michael also said, that my previous job was as a senior advisor for the Oslo City Administration, responsible for actually writing this strategy. So I know it quite well. And it's very amazing for me to have been a paper bureaucrat, and now I can get the chance to actually go into the field and implement the plans we made. So the main goal of the campus strategy is, simply put, to empower Oslo as an internationally attractive knowledge capital and business-friendly city. This entails better interplay between urban development, education, research, business, and different public policies, which are keys to contribute to innovation, transformation to a zero-emission society, and job creation. And Oslo has an excellent starting point for achieving this. We have more than 80,000 students in Oslo. And we are Norway's Center for Higher Education and R&D activity. And 70 to 80% of Norwegian tech companies are located in and around Oslo. And around 40% of Oslo's businesses are knowledge intensive already. But, however, though we have a great starting point, there are numerous challenges that we need to tackle in order to achieve our main goal of translating knowledge into innovation and growth. For instance, Norway has 33% fewer technology-based startups and 50% lower venture capital investments than comparative neighboring countries. So simply put, Oslo is the Norway Center of Education and Research and center of knowledge-intensive business sector. And as a compact knowledge city, we have most of the required infrastructure and geography. But as previously mentioned, we still haven't managed the last, yet integral part of translation knowledge into innovation and growth. So this is where the innovation district comes in. We have learned a lot from leading knowledge cities internationally. Among these are Copenhagen, Stockholm, Kendall Square in Boston, and of course, Liverpool. It's impressive to see what you have achieved with the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter in such a short period of time, and it is exciting to follow your city development processes. So one key lesson from those cities is that physical proximity, close cooperation and information flow between institutions for research and education, companies, entrepreneurs and investors are decisive factors for innovation and knowledge-based business development. So, what is Oslo Science City and how will we implement it? Oslo Science City will stretch over the University of Oslo's main campus. It's on the top. In this area in Norway, is the area in Norway with the most researchers and students per square meter. And in the coming years, numerous new development projects will also take place in this area. On the top of the map, a new university hospital. We will also have a new university life science building. the expansion of current research and startup facilities, such as the Oslo Science Park and the Science Center Sinte. And the Norwegian state broadcaster, NRK, is moving from their current headquarters, so their huge offices must be used for something else. And the metro station in the area are about to get major upgrades. So this will open up for new possibilities to develop an innovation district in this area. So we also have a moment, actually. So still, we need to collaborate closely to strengthen the innovation ecosystem and to provide good access to research infrastructure as a part of this. There is also a need to provide more space for location of knowledge-intensive businesses close to the strong research institutions. We would like to see Oslo Science City as a livable urban area that includes housing as well as restaurants, cafes, cultural services, in addition to businesses and academic institutions. It must also be open and an inviting area for people and an integrated part of the city. We believe that the key for success is to have everyone on board. And in this sense, we have a very good starting point. In addition to the local government, the current main partners of Oslo Science City are all the major knowledge organizations in the area, so-called anchor institutions. The University of Oslo, the Regional Health Authority, the Oslo University Hospital, SINTEF, and Oslo Science Park. We believe that Oslo Science City has the potential of becoming one of the leading innovation districts in Europe. We only just started, but we have seen the success of other cities and are excited to embark on this new adventure. We also look forward to continuing our dialogue with Liverpool and other cities in UK. So thank you for listening to our plans here.
Marvellous. Liverpool, Glasgow, being on natural comparison. Desmond McNulty, distinguished career, Minister of Scottish Government, now Assistant Vice President of Glasgow, Deputy President of Policy Scotland. Our two cities have long histories. We've grown together and grown apart. We're growing back again. So Des, please give us your reflections and thoughts on this really quite tricky topic.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. I'm going to say a few things about Glasgow just to orient you to what the differences and similarities are, and I'm going to focus on inclusive growth because I think that's very much a shared agenda. Let me start out by talking about anchor institutions, because I think we all sort of know what anchor institutions are, but they're basically those organisations that are not going to move. The City Council, the university, other major cultural institutions that are of significant importance to the economy and the community life. They're very important in cities. I mean, the universities of Liverpool and Glasgow play a huge role, not least in developing an international link between our cities and the rest of the world. They contribute hugely to the economy of the cities. But I suppose what I'm arguing is that anchor institutions, and particularly universities, are going to have to think afresh about what their role is and what they do. And I would argue move from what essentially has been a kind of passive role in the past to a much more active role. And what I mean by that is, in a sense, universities have been carrying out their purpose. They're research institutions, they're teaching institutions, they're not by their very nature economic development institutions. But I think in the world that we're now in, both in terms of the demands that have been made of universities, but also, in a sense, what universities themselves want to do, then there is a move from, in a sense, being part of the city, but not necessarily for the city, to actually now saying, we are absolutely for the city that we're in. But I think, to some extent, it does start with what I'll call the campus. And certainly in Glasgow, that is the current fit of Glasgow University. We're in the west end of the city, driven there by air pollution in the 1870s. The general move west, so carbon is not necessarily a new issue. And down at the bottom here, in this green area, is what used to be the Western Infirmary in Glasgow. Now, the land was ceded by the university in about 1880 on a contract that allowed us to take it back when that hospital shut. So we've now got a 14-acre site immediately contiguous with our buildings, which is allowing us to reconfigure the whole of the campus and put new buildings on, research hub, teaching hub, life sciences building, arts building, etc. We're going to be spending £1 billion on campus regeneration. It's a huge project and a huge commitment for the university. And to put it in context, the Glasgow City deal, which is one of the largest city deals in the UK, I think the second biggest after West Midlands, is 1.13 billion, 400 million of which is in Glasgow. So the university's investment is 2.5 times what the city deal is actually bringing to the city, and it's a huge thing for us to do. That is it as it is, or actually as it was, because lots of that stuff has now been knocked down, and the new buildings are starting to go up. One of the things that we did when we started to think about economic development and what impact we might have as a university is to actually begin to think what else is there. And we're in a position in Glasgow where £900 million was spent on the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, which is the largest district hospital in Europe, extremely modern. People call it the Death Star. Anyway, every new hospital has its teething problems. We also have... Don't go there, Sinead. Don't go there. Don't upset the man. We also have something called the Scottish Events Campus, which is the 9th largest conference business in the world. And within that, there's something called the Hydro, which is the 2nd largest music venue in the UK, and has actually been responsible for a huge regeneration of the area immediately adjacent to it. So what used to be a poor down at heel area is now full of restaurants and pubs, and it's where people go to have a good night out in Glasgow. And we've also got what I'm calling Creative Clyde here. So the broadcasters have come, BBC, STV, etc., the Science Centre. So all within a relatively narrow area on both sides of the Clyde. And we also got a whole range of cultural sites. I mean, arguably we've got more cultural sites in this part of Glasgow than anywhere but South Kensington. You know, we've got one of the best, actually probably the best, municipal art gallery. But Walken's pretty close as well. Kelvin Road is pretty cool. Glasgow people in the 1850s to 1920s invested hugely in art, and most of that was a good proportion was handed on the city. The Kelvin Hall, which was a huge exhibition centre built in 1938. We've got beautiful botanic gardens, a science centre, a riverside museum, which is brand new. I could go on, there's lots of others. These are just sort of the highlights. So culture is a big part of the offer in Glasgow. And as part of the city deal, we've got what we're calling public realm improvements that are being improved. And one of these things, actually crucial, includes a bridge, a pedestrian bridge over the Clyde. So the north side of the city was separated from the south side of the Clyde. Just the river was a physical barrier, something that was, you know, a kind of thoroughfare in the past is now going to be bridged. And it will allow people to walk or to cycle from the new campus to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital rather than go round by road, and also link up with the events campus and so on. So the city deal's been a big component. So you bring all these assets together and say, what can we do? The north side of the river is relatively affluent. The south side of the river, particularly around or towards the southern, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, is a bit like some of the poorer areas of Liverpool. I mean, it's high multiple deprivation area. It's something that had a strong industrial past and has suffered badly over the last 40 years or so. So it's a big priority for the city to share the prosperity between north and south. And one of the things we did was to actually say the innovation district wasn't just about the university, it was about how we brought together different areas to try and bring prosperity sorted out. So that has become what we're now calling the Glasgow Riverside Innovation District. And the yellow pieces of coloration there are actually land that's available. So we've actually got a good store of land that's available there. The university has actually taken leadership of this project. We're developing stakeholder links with different people. We already have excellent links with the Health Trust. And that hospital and the single nature of the Health Trust is a big advantage to us in being able to take stuff forward. But with the broadcasters and with SEC and the City Council and Scottish Enterprise, which is in effect the equivalent of your lab. So there's the anchors positioned within the innovation district. And one aspect of this, there's a couple of sites that we're identifying where we're looking to, in a sense, take out things from the university. And in particular, in our case, nanotechnology and precision medicine. We're trying to build on the research expertise that we've got in the university that already have links with companies and set up new sites where these companies can interact closely with the research excellence. So in nanotechnology, we have a nanofabrication facility, which is probably the best in the UK, one of the best in the world. We're going to take that somewhere else, rebuild it, make it better, and then work with all the companies that we've already engaged in. In precision medicine, we've got within the hospital there's a 7D scanner that is in a clinical setting, and companies are very interested in working with us on that because we've got all the patient access that Louise was talking about in Liverpool. But let me add to that, because the innovation district is adjacent to a financial district. So Barclays have recently put in 2,500 new jobs, drawn to Glasgow because of the excellence of our computing science and other data graduates. JP Morgan are looking at significantly expanding their facility in the area. Strathclyde University, which is about 2/3 as big as Glasgow, a leading technological university, they're developing their own if you like, innovation district in the city centre with different focuses to ours, but some similarities and overlaps. There's another innovation district being created to the west of Glasgow, which is manufacturing orientated and medicines orientated. And what we're beginning to see is what we're calling a string of pearls, so innovation clusters within Glasgow, that in a sense are actually beginning to create a narrative for the city. And I think that's a really crucial thing. So what is it about Glasgow that we've got in our assets that is actually going to make people want to locate businesses, to think about Glasgow in a new and different way? Glasgow's been very good at marketing itself in terms of the attitude and character of its people. All we want to do is to add to that the character and quality of its innovation offer. And we've got, we believe, excellent anchor institutions and capability to underpin that. You can't give these kinds of narratives if there's not substance behind it. We think we've actually been building up that. So, what about inclusive growth? I actually slightly disagree with Henrietta, because she said you can't have growth first and then inclusion second. You need to do it the other way around. I actually think you've got to do it in parallel and at the same time. I think they're not different things. One of the problems with inclusive growth, I've just given you a series of definitions here. Read them through. They tend to be quite aspirational. They're not precise. What is it is a big question in all of this. people want a good society. They want to see positive things happening. They want to have inequality tackled. But saying that that's what you want to do is not the same as doing it. And in a sense, I've been on a journey personally over the last 30 years. Inequality has been something that's always motivated me. And I think we've got a lot of successes in Glasgow in tackling inequality or limiting the impact of it. But what we haven't done is fundamentally reverse it. And I think, particularly with the financial circumstances of local government and the health service and so on now, that would be true north of the border and south of the border, very different situation to what we had, say, 15 years ago. We need to do this, but we need to also be aware that the long-term trends in poverty are actually increasing. They're not getting better. So the Scottish Government has inclusive growth aspirations. They've grouped them in these categories here and spelt out what they want to see Scotland as being. What they tried to do is come up with a definition, which I don't think they have quite done yet. But what they have done is try to develop a diagnostic about what you need to do in order to get inclusive growth. So gathering lots of data about disadvantage and then saying, how can that data guide our policy going forward? I suppose what I would say is that high-level indicators can tell you quite a lot about the mapping background, and they can tell you where the progress might be. They don't tell you which things are going to work, and they don't tell you how to choose between these things. So that's really one of the problems in generating inclusive growth. So I'm going to offer you, in my last 4 slides, some thoughts about how you take forward inclusive growth. And I've basically come up with 6 things that I think you need to do in terms of inclusive growth. And a lot of these things are about getting different silos of different policy areas to work together. So how economic policy interplays with health policy or with, let's say, community engagement. So, it's getting the different bits of policy to line up and to get the health people to actually think that what they're doing is not just addressing health disadvantage, they're actually promoting through economic inclusion more healthy lives, and equally to get the economic development people to think that what they're doing is actually contributing to the improvement of health, and that will actually meet their objectives, and so on. So economic growth policies, I think it's really important, especially when we talk about innovation district. You need to focus on the everyday economy as well as the leading sectors. The whole thrust of innovation district is the cutting edge, the research leading stuff. And that's really important. But what's also really important is where most people work and how you can get innovation into those sectors. I think there's been mention of fair work issues, so wage levels is really important. You can deal with inequality, what people earn, and dealing with issues like in-work poverty. But so is important also are skills issues. And different levels of skills issues, so you need to address digital literacy, you need to address the people who have been left behind, who are not getting education, people that Louise was talking about, who from birth right the way through are getting disadvantaged. But you also need to improve high-end skills, because that's what's going to draw companies and investment into your area. The linkage between different types of inclusion policy is really important. The poverty policy, social cohesion policy, the health, well-being and social care, sustainability and carbon reduction. I haven't heard that mentioned yet, but actually, climate emergency, inclusive growth has actually got to bear on that. And participation, I think this is really important. It's about unlocking the capability of people, not a kind of we will decide what's good for you and that's what's going to happen. It's about releasing the energy of people and the capabilities of people. So you need to find ways of engaging with them. And they will take forward inclusive economy initiatives. I think some of the things that Emma was talking about that they're doing in London are absolutely fantastic models for us, and these are things that we will be looking to pick on. Some of the stuff at White City as well, there's some great stuff. We can exchange ideas, we're not in competition with each other. These are really things that we can do. Place-based initiatives are really important. You know, there's a big focus on place. The UK government is interested in place, Scottish government is interested in place. How do we deal with the problems of localities that are left behind? This is not an easy thing, you know, because towns on the edge of cities is a big important issue here. It's not just all about cities. What future do they have? How can we negotiate that? Alongside that, initiatives at a population level. I mean, think about the relative levels of people with disabilities getting into employment in different parts of the country. It's much higher in the southeast than it is in places like Liverpool and Manchester, because the labour markets are different. So how do we do targeted initiatives that actually support particular groups of people who are either protected or disadvantaged? And then engagement policies that promote collaboration between anchor institutions. And universities in competition, they don't naturally work together. They've got to. They've got to start to work together, and they've got to work with cities. I mean, I've been in local government, I've been on the health board, I've been in the university. They've all got their different language, different cultures, different ways of making decisions. Getting collaboration is not just a matter of getting them all to sit down in a room. It's actually about finding different ways to work and thinking about how you do that. What about delivery? Well, strengthening collaborations between core partners and building connections with business and entrepreneurs. You know, a lot of what we're doing is actually public sector led. You know, business hasn't been engaged as much as it needs to be. I'm listening to what's happening elsewhere. There seems to be a stronger business role. So that's something that we need to take forward. We need to exert greater influence on the city-based policy, institution regulatory. Local government has huge power, you know, and sometimes doesn't realise what power it's got. It's a convening power, it's a regulatory power, as well as a financial power. It doesn't need to do everything itself, but the universities have powers as well. Other anchor institutions have power. So if we can maximise the different types of power and get them to interplay with each other towards a common goal and common vision, we can really move stuff forward. And I think inclusive growth needs to get into the missions of institutions. You know, so in a sense, if we're going to do it, then we need to get it into the strategy, we need to get it into the mindset, we need to persuade people that this is something that they want to do, which is not always straightforward. I mean, universities, for example, you know, think of themselves as research institutions and teaching institutions. So can they, you know, also begin to think of themselves as civic institutions, and what does that mean for the way in which they're run, for the attitudes of staff, etc., etc., etc. And then my final slide is really actually the pragmatic end. Think about what you're going to do. Don't try to do everything. Target interventions so that you're absolutely clear what it is that you want to achieve, how you're going to achieve it. There's a logic chain associated with it, and you've got some evaluation or measurement to know whether you're getting it done. What can you do? Don't be over ambitious. But at the same time, do be ambitious, because actually we need ambition into this. So it's about not over promising, but if you can, over delivering is really what needs to be done. I think support initiatives that engage citizens is absolutely vital. As I say, unleash the power and the potential in the population, rather than assume that the core institutions have all the answers. Think about an innovation ecosystem. You want to create something that is self-sustaining, rather than something that you have to constantly recreate all the time. So, and be prepared to kind of loosen off the shackles and controls in order to be able to do that. And finally, I think just manage the risk of over-broadening the aspiration. I mean, it's always a matter of judgment, and every place is different. There's no one single answer to do it. But I think, think about risk management and how you create the kind of collective sense of purpose and realism in delivering something like this. And I think if we can do that in places like Glasgow and Liverpool, then we can transform our cities. But it won't be easy. It won't be easy.
Thank you, Des, for that very detailed, realistic and ambitious conversation. Lots to take up later on, and lots more doing in Liverpool. when I talked to Paul, he said, well, I've got a lot of slides, but I'm going last. He said, I'll be chucking them out as I go. You get your full 10 minutes, never mind the time. Paul, we were joking earlier, huge experience of international projects in this field. Associate Director of ARUP, delighted you with us, so please Paul, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike and Colin, team, for having me. This isn't just going to be my holiday snaps, so there might be some in there. Part of what I was asked today was to look at what this city is doing in terms of its outward-looking nature. So where is this city going? What is the city doing overseas to learn and through partnerships? So I had to look at examples of other innovation districts, obviously looking at the ones in the UK, other ones in Europe, and then looking at those abroad and understanding where does Liverpool already have relationships. So this is about today, which is about talking relationships and building on those relationships. So it's looking at cities and partners that we already have, looking at the focus of where we go out as a city and also in terms of supporting the UK government to look at partnership and then bringing ideas from those areas back. So each of the examples which I've selected have got a slightly different take on them, and they all have relevance here for the Knowledge Quarter. So I'm going to talk about a number of 4 projects. So we have the Brooklyn Naval Yard in New York. I'm going to talk about Kendall Square in Cambridge, the Zhuhai Smart Campus District in Shanghai, and then finish up with the Elbertor Quarter in Hamburg. So in terms of Brooklyn Yard, so the Brooklyn Yard isn't a dissimilar size to Paddington Village. It's a former naval yard by its name in terms of its role in the making of New York. It had a key part to play in the development of naval technologies and naval development. That fell out of favour in terms of the last 20, 30 years, and the area has undergone a major regeneration. What the area has that's similar to what we have here in Liverpool, it's a partnership between the city, the universities and the private sector. And what they're looking to do is transform and bring jobs back right into the heart of Brooklyn. And the key focus of this area isn't actually just about knowledge creation, it's about manufacturing. So it actually creates 9,000 jobs at the moment in the heart of this former industrial area. And the focus is around collaboration, creation, and actually having opportunities for people to come together and rent spaces on different sizes. So this enables your big multinational operators to come and operate here, but also in partnership with small SMEs, individual businesses that have to pitch to actually be in this space. And it means that there's sort of that coalescence of use. So it does have a holiday snap of Colin. But what's quite interesting about this space is it's actually how you can bring facilities together. So as an individual small company, you might not be able to access 3D printing and advanced technologies. And what they've done in this space is bring this all together as one rentable space. This whole building's focus is around well-being. So it has a distillery, it has coffee shops, it has other things in that building which enable it to become a focus for the community around it. And also the transformational benefits that this has. This area was low air quality and high pollution. And what they've looked to do is how they've activated the roof space of these buildings to bring in farms. So Brooklyn Grange is an internationally renowned example of how you can bring farming into the heart of the city centre. And actually what they do is they work with unemployed and people in the local communities, and they create opportunities for the sharing of learning for schools, but also, more importantly, about increasing the biodiversity of the area and improving overall air quality. So this is about innovation within new areas. I'm going to come on to Kendall Square in America, and it was referenced actually in Christine's presentation. So in terms of Kendall Square, it's the largest concentration of venture capitalists, but also of students and education in North America. What Kendall Square is going through at the moment, it's going through a transformation. So historically it was just the coming together of the university campuses, and what they're now looking to do is how you go back in and create opportunities for business. So as I said, part of this is around how do you get people to connect, how do you get people to have those chance meetings that create ideas, that create products, which create innovation. So what they're actually focusing on at the moment is how do you activate ground spaces? How do you create these coffee shops? How do you create these areas? How do you create opportunities for academics to bump into investors, to bump into opportunities? And one of the things that they've been very, very clear on as a city is that it's the developers and the partners coming forward that have to deliver this change. The city is not putting any money in at all into this district, it's the universities and other partners. So you've got examples here as an example of the Novartis, big pharma company, who's gone right into the heart of this area. They've effectively gifted all their ground floor of their units to independent businesses, but what they've done that's different is they asked their employees who they wanted on the ground floor. So they've got a mixture of kindergartens, coffee shops, yoga studios, and they're all about creating place. But importantly, all the public areas around these buildings have to be open to the public. So it appears as a modern and open and inclusive environment to try and bring in those neighbouring areas. And I said it's also now going through a transformation. So it's that phase that we're seeing here in Liverpool. So they had a big growth of the student population, but what they're now seeing is the high-end residential accommodation coming in, but also importantly for this area, a big amount of social housing coming in as well. So there's that good mix within these areas in terms of transformation. In terms of Zhuhai Smart Campus in China, so again, this is focusing in on Liverpool's relationships. This is the 20th year of Liverpool's sister status with Shanghai. And one of the things that they're doing in this particular campus, this was an old industrial area of the city, which again is going through innovation. They're not just making themselves environmentally aware, they're making their buildings carbon positive. So they're actually going a step beyond what is standard and standard practice, and they're looking at how you can create an area that adds to the biodiversity again of the area, addresses things like carbon, but then also enables Footloose and international companies to come into this area. So one of the things they've been looking is at animated spaces, and they have a series of flexible pop-up uses that can be moved around at different times of the year. So one of the challenges you have in university campuses is the fact that a lot of the students, or the majority of the students, leave during certain times of the year, and that creates problems in terms of how you use those spaces. So what they've been doing here is introducing pop-up gyms, pop-up coffee shops. It's not innovative, it's not new, it's just how they're applying it to this space. Something they've also been able to do is have technology and test and trial things. Because this is a university campus, you can bring things together, and they've got, you can't quite see it there, but it's electric charging points. So it's a lamppost that does everything in terms of monitoring air quality, giving information, and also energy. In terms of success, what has it meant? It's meant that Microsoft has set up their China focus for Microsoft Reactor, and that's effectively bringing small individual businesses and entrepreneurs to work together in this environment. But it's also about actually creating place. So in the centre of this new area is a museum of radio. So this is an old industrial facility, and what they've done is created something which brings in young children to come and understand how technology has changed our lives and continues to change our lives. I am flying through this.
And you have to. You have to. Good man.
In terms of the Albert Gate Quarter in Harvard City, you hear a lot about Harvard City in Hamburg, but I think what I wanted to focus in is the long-term mission that it's had. So established back in the 1980s in terms of what this area of the city was going to go through transformation, and what they were able to do was to support with the local government, but also to petition national government to put the infrastructure in place. So what they've been very focused on at the outset is that Harvard City is going to be a bike-focused city, and again we had this discussion earlier around the transformation that means. And this has actually just sort of elevated the bike in terms of the role it has in this area for movement, but it's also about larger structural change in terms of infrastructure. So underneath Harvard City is the Metro link, and one of the things that they've been able to do there is create that connectivity. So they've put in the infrastructure now for a city which is going to be delivered in the next 20, 30, 40 years, very similar to London. You're building in that capacity for the future. What do you do with a space that doesn't currently have anyone using it? It becomes a theatre and music experience of an evening, which brings people down to a part of the city they weren't using before. But it's also about understanding the space and the place you're in. So when I saw this, I was a little concerned that there was a coach just floating down the river in Hamburg. For those of you not familiar with Hamburg, Harvard City is a city which regularly floods 2-3 times a year. It's actually designed to flood 1 in 50 years, but it's flooded 3 times in the last 12 months. So this kind of shows you the challenge that the area has to go through. So what they've been doing is looking about how they're resilient, how they're innovative, how can this area continue to work even when it's flooded, even when there's opportunities. So by being innovative, Greenpeace Germany have now based their facilities right in the heart of the city, and the universities now followed. And this is about creating opportunities. So we can come back to any of these in more detail. But that's the end of my rattle around the world. So thank you very much.
Well, that was absolutely fabulous, and I was timing it. It was about 7 minutes, I'm sorry. So thank you for getting us back on track. Wonderful, wonderful. We're actually at the point where we should have given a coffee, but there's been an awful lot of things said, so I suspect we should have a moment or two to colleagues to ask questions, make comments. There's a huge amount of material in there, and we're getting to lose all of that. And we'll adjust your coffee break and adjust your lunch break, but you know, ideas are more important too. Michael Eakin from the law firm, please. Sally, thank you. We'll take 1 or 2. Thank you. Sheila, thank you.
Michael Eakin, Royal Liverpool Philharmonic. All the speakers spoke about the importance of culture and the cultural sector in regeneration and inclusive growth. I think Liverpool's done a good job on that over the last decade or more, and Mayor Anderson has been brilliantly clear in the importance of culture in the economic regeneration of the city. I think as well as that, there's good work going on, but I think the next stage is to really build on our work as co-producers, partners in place, addressing some of those key inequalities around health and economy and education that we've talked about already. I'm just interested really in anything the panel have got to say from their own experience of how both they've engaged the cultural sector, but crucially how the cultural sector has stepped up and played its part in inclusive growth in the way that I think we're doing, and we certainly need to do here as well.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you, Michael. Colleague here in the front, middle, please.
I've got a question for the panel. My name's Elizabeth Collins and I work for Liverpool Health Partners. Emma, I loved your analogy about the loft and the basement. I thought that was tremendous. And my question to the panel is about those situations where you don't have the permission you need for the basement and people object to the noise and they don't like the vibrations that your deep digging causes. And the reason I ask is I'm in a very fortunate position. I work for an organisation where managed risk is encouraged, and we have great leadership role models. I'm not just saying that because my chief executive is here in the room with me, it's true. The reason I ask is because on the back of the challenges that Louise outlined, and the people that Colin described as the change makers don't always see themselves as such, especially when they've got very busy operational roles. So kind of in that context, which John acknowledged is difficult, how do we go about ensuring our basement is how we would like it to look?
Okay, thank you for that. And Sheila McNulty over here, thanks.
Hello, Sheila McNulty, ex-Iron Scouser, been working in Manchester for about 30 years in regeneration. So I've just got 2 very specific questions for the panel, but I would like to almost reclaim the word regeneration. Some of the panellists at the beginning of the day talked about it being just buildings and physical, and we've learned from that. I never worked with just that. It was always about social programmes linked with physical investment and cities change. I think it was the 2008 recession that narrowed our definitions. But we've said that it's not just about buildings, but we have, of course, seen a lot of spatial plans and a lot of real physical investment. So my question is, with regard to this new world of flexible spaces, what do you want from your architects, designers and builders? What do you want them to do differently now in this new world? And then the other question I had on the back of the ARUP presentation was, do we need to be truly exceptional city? We're always trying to be really distinctive, aren't we, when you look around the world? But most cities' narratives are quite similar. So how do we avoid mimicking other cities?
Okay, brilliant. That's probably all the time we have in this session. So, interesting question. Culture, fixing the basement. What do you want from architects, and how do you make special, unique, and yet have this cookie-cutter model? Who wants to go first? Paul wants to go first.
Okay, yeah, so it's very important in terms of effectively competition. What is it your city is and what does it stand for? And I think it's almost a given now that cities around the world have certain universities, they all have similarities. And it's a very similar conversation that we've all been going through around the high street, that every high street in the UK suddenly becomes the same and then they all die. So it's actually about how do you get that individuality, and it goes down to place. So each of those examples that I've shown, I've actually tried to draw on the place to make them themselves unique. But key to that is the people in those communities. And I think something that we have that's very strong in Liverpool is that identity, but also in terms of that history. So it's about how we can bring those two together. And I think one of the challenges you have when you create something like the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter, the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter means something to everyone sitting in this room. Does it mean the same thing to people in Kensington, or people in Google, or people on the other side of the world? And I think that's the challenge. We can start using names, but it's actually once it becomes common vocabulary for people to understand that this is an area, this is something that means something to me.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to come around because I think we're short of time. So, and you don't have to answer all the questions, but Des, I think, Christine and Emma.
I'll pick up two of the questions, one on distinctiveness and the other on culture. I mean, I do think there are lots of similarities between Glasgow and Liverpool. I mean, I think that's been very, very apparent to me. But I think they are different cities, and there is a sense in which, if you think about the economic destiny of these cities, I mean, they've always had similarities, but they've also had differences throughout their history. So I would see no particular competitive problem. There might be some, but I don't think there is a huge issue. The key thing, I think, is to be kind of clear with yourself about what your distinctiveness is. So one of the things that we're doing through the Commission for Economic Growth in Glasgow is really subjecting our economy and our city to kind of quite hard scrutiny. I mean, it's very easy to kind of put forward a puff piece to say we're really good at this and we're really good at that and we've got this and we've got that. I mean, what we really need to do is get beneath that and say, what is the innovation economy really like?
Yeah.
Where are we really weak? Where are we really strong? And how do we actually rectify that? And in a sense, the first thing is to be honest with ourselves, and then the next thing is to work out what we then do, and then take that forward. In terms of culture, I think that's an area where we think we are strong. There is a very strong cultural identity within Glasgow and a huge history of innovation. Could the ecosystem for cultural production be stronger? Yes. How do we do that? Well, we need to engage with cultural organisations and with individual cultural entrepreneurs to see in the centre where they see the barriers. One of the things that's quite interesting, I think, in the cultural sector, and particularly speaking to BBC and SPD, is that in the past they've recruited certain types of people who are, in a sense, culture professionals. They're now having to recruit people who are data professionals, because in order to get their messages across or to function effectively as organisations, then they require some of the same skills that traditionally went to other sectors of business. So there is a sense in which the cultural industries, in order to survive and prosper, are having to diversify and progress and engage with people they might not have that. So we've got BBC speaking to our computing studies department because they're really dependent on those graduates in order to effectively do that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Christine?
I think at the moment I have more questions than answers after 5 weeks. So, but the thing is that we will start with this in our district as well, to figure out what the strengths we should build on. So I think I will give this to you.
Thank you. Configurations is a good thing. I'm going to try and take all three very quickly in turn. So the point about culture, I completely agree. I think culture is absolutely fundamental. I actually think we have an awful lot to learn from the cultural sector, because as a sector, the cultural sector has always been very good and exchanging ideas, expressing ideas, sharing, maybe because there isn't enough money half the time, but it's got a long history in knowing how to build genuine partnerships and working collectively. So as a model of practice, there's a lot that we need to lift and shift through the cultural sector. I also had some really interesting conversations with Silicon Valley recently and learning about what their risks are and how they're seeing Silicon Valley change as one of the first sort of global innovation districts and really understood as a leading one back in the 1980s. They're really struggling, and mainly because they don't have a cultural offer. They actually articulate that as one of the fundamental reasons why they can see a downhill trajectory, because they don't have that sort of rich ecosystem that we talked about that is constantly fed by the microbes that are our cultural activity. That really creates the richness and the food that we all need to thrive on. And I've had the privilege recently of working with a huge selection of big cultural institutions for what we call EastBank, which is a movement of major cultural and education institutions to the Olympic Park. We're talking about the V&A, the Smithsonian, South as Wales, UCL, and the BBC actually. So it's really, really exciting. For us, it would be the equivalent of what Exhibition Road was in 1851 and then the South Bank was in London in 1951. Huge, huge scale. But what I've been really impressed with is the humble nature of those massive global cultural institutions. Their recognition that for them, this move is also about them understanding they need to up their game, they need to stay relevant, they need to change a lot of their practices and a lot of their thinking. And the way they need to do that is to engage with the local population that is diverse East London. And they need to connect with the existing cultural institutions that are already there, really tiny scale as well as big scale. And actually, I think that's impressed me quite a lot, because it's made me think the cultural institutions, at least those ones, have got quite an honest and humble approach to how you offer more within a kind of cultural collective. They have a role to play with that, but they're not dominating that, which is really refreshing. Just to move very quickly on to the basement planning objections question, which was really well put. This is a real issue. How do you create the change when there are often so many barriers? In simple terms, I would say do it under the radar, at least to start off with. I'm a big fan of not asking for permission, and occasionally not apologising when it goes wrong either. So I do think it's about having the confidence to prototype and testing that are really, really small scale so that they can be unnoticed for at least a little while. Then you use that to create the energy, the momentum, and the proof points that you need to galvanise a little bit more backing. And I have done that an awful lot with various community groups, community movements. It is real community campaigning practice, so again, it's learning lessons from other models of social and economic practice. But before you get to the campaigning mode, you have to really galvanise your forces, and you have to try things out to work out where your messages are and where your models are. And there's nothing wrong in doing that, so I would just keep at it even if it's under the radar when you start. And the final one, what do we want from our architects and designers and builders of the future? Very good question. In short, I would say we want our buildings and our places to really focus on flexibility. There's no point in designing for single use anymore. Every building, every business needs to be able to do more. That's the undercurrent of what we've been saying this morning. We absolutely have to think about the climate emergency, and we have to recondition what we expect of our designers and our architects and our urban planners. That has to be the starting point when we're building or creating anything new. How do we make it, I really like your example, how do we make it carbon positive? How do we start to transform what urban centres do in terms of the climate agenda? And really importantly, I think we need more of a focus on civic realm and I mean genuine public spaces. So it's less about the buildings, it's more about the spaces in between. Yeah, and I think it is about creating those genuinely public places where the mixing and melting spots can occur. As you said before, that's where a lot of the innovation through collision and collaboration happens. So the more we can encourage those spaces and emphasise those rather than the ones behind closed doors, the better we'll be.
Brilliant. In fact, that's a wonderful point to end because that takes us back to the article. Fantastic. It's been wonderful. The job of the chair start on time and end on time. I've failed. We are late. I'm going to suggest that we have a 20-minute coffee break, if I may. And if you can be back in this room by about 10 to 12. But before you go, can I ask you to show appreciation